This is TWiT.
Facebook, like pretty much any social network today, has had its fair share of run-ins with the growing threat, let's say, of deepfakes on its platform. As we lead up to the 2020 election, Facebook is attempting to tighten its controls, and deepfakes are in the crosshairs there, as well as a number of things. So many announcements coming from Facebook, it's hard to keep it all straight. But there's just enough gray area here to keep things complicated. And joining us to discuss this is Will Oremus from 10, who wrote about this at 10. Welcome back to the show, Will.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's great to get you on. So first of all, what kinds of deepfakes, and even you mentioned shallow fakes in your article, has Facebook had to deal with thus far? I know the Nancy Pelosi kind of slurring words, slow down thing isn't technically a deep fake, but I think a lot of people might kind of put that into the same category. What are they dealing with before we get to the changes they've made?
Yeah, the funny thing is they're actually not dealing with many deep fakes, at least by Facebook's narrow definition of what counts as a deep fake. The Pelosi one is probably the most famous example of a faked video or a doctored video that has gone viral on Facebook and actually might have had some kind of impact on people. This was one, if you can recall, where it was somebody slowed down a speech by Nancy Pelosi to make it look like she might have been drunk or intoxicated or maybe had dementia or something. It traveled pretty far and wide, people saying, wow, what's wrong with Nancy Pelosi, before it was exposed that it was, in fact, edited. That's not a deep fake, though. It's what people call a shallow fake. It's just conventional video editing tools. Anybody could do it in their home. A deep fake is when you use machine learning or AI usually to superimpose one person's head on another person's body. So it makes it look like the person is saying or doing something that they didn't really say or do. That's what Facebook's new policy is targeting. The truth is we haven't seen much of that. If there is a canonical example, it's probably created actually by BuzzFeed in 2018 for purposes of illustrating what deepfakes are. They made a video where it looked like Barack Obama was giving an address. He was all in a suit in front of the American flag, and he said things like Donald Trump is a complete and utter. Then the camera pulled back and showed that it was actually Jordan Peele who was doing Obama's voice, and they were using deepfake technology to make it look like Obama was saying things he wasn't. That sparked a lot of fear and panic. You know, is this the future of social media? And it still could be, but in the year and a half since then, it just hasn't been. I think they're hard to do. Nobody maybe has wanted to be the first to get in trouble for it. They're hard to do convincingly, so maybe there have been some that just haven't gone very viral. But really, it's not a problem today on the platform of Facebook.
Yeah, and I think as I was kind of hearing you walk through these things, you know, stepping back to the Pelosi example that you use, on one hand, someone could say, oh, well, that's a shallow fake, let's say. On the other hand, someone could say, well, no, I made that as more like a parody or a satire thing or whatever. And therein lies this weird kind of murky world of, okay, well, what was the intention? What was the purpose? And do these rules actually do anything to tackle one versus the other? Who makes that determination? That's why the rules such as these are so difficult to enforce. So what exactly has Facebook said? Like, what is their criteria?
Right. So they laid out a very specific definition of what counts as a deepfake under their policy, which bans deepfakes. So in order to qualify as a deepfake, you have to be using machine learning or AI software, and it has to be making a person look like they said something that they did not, in fact, say. In addition to that, if it is parody or satire, if it's deemed parody or satire, then it will not be banned. That will still be allowed. So presumably the BuzzFeed example would not be taken down because it was, it was a parody, right? Let's see, were there any other key elements there? It's also, the fact that they're talking about only what people said means if you could do a deep fake that makes it look like somebody's doing something that they're not actually doing, that wouldn't count under the ban. So no shallow fakes, no videos that aren't about speech and people. So there's a lot that it doesn't cover, in fact.
Okay. So I know that early on when we first started hearing about these rules, there was some sort of exclusion, which I thought was kind of interesting. Of political figures are wouldn't qualify into this, and meanwhile I'm thinking, well, maybe that's something to reconsider because I could see that happening.
Kind of a big thing, yeah.
Call me crazy, but that was all a bit of confusion. What happened there exactly?
Right. So it at first seemed that the policy was going to have an exemption for politicians, which is true of Facebook's policy on fact-checking ads. If you're not a politician and you run an ad that comes out false as in the fact-checking process, that Facebook will take that down. They won't let you run that. But if you're a politician, they will. They say it's because ads by politicians are newsworthy. I think most people suspect it's really because Facebook doesn't want to be in the position of taking down a politician's ad when that politician might have power over Facebook. But there is some legitimate newsworthiness argument there. But then Facebook spokesman said, actually, we got it wrong. The deepfakes policy does not have an exemption for politicians. Politicians won't be able to post a deepfake under our new policy, just like everybody else won't be able to post a deepfake under our new policy. But the funny thing is, I mean, the fact that Facebook's own policy spokesperson is getting this wrong just illustrates how Byzantine Facebook's rules are becoming. I mean, it has different ways of dealing with misinformation, ads from politicians, deepfakes, shallow fakes, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious to know why Facebook would draw the line in the sand for, let's say, deepfakes, and which they made a point of saying, AI created, that sort of thing, versus like, I guess, human created. Like, you can do the same effect, the human using a computer versus an AI doing this, dynamically for you. But I don't know, maybe they just assume that the AI version is going to be more convincing. But why they're drawing the line in the sand with what they call deepfakes and these shallow fakes that can also be destructive and damaging are being allowed through. Is this why do you believe that is? Why aren't they committing on a much wider scale to this? Is it just so difficult to do at scale? I mean, that's Facebook's eternal problem.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I mean, there's the Facebook explanation, then there's sort of the cynical explanation. I think the cynical explanation would look at the fact that Facebook released this policy a day before it was scheduled to testify on Capitol Hill in a House subcommittee hearing on manipulation of social media. So they wanted to have something to point to when they're up there in front of Congress, to say, look, we are doing something. We're being proactive. We're ahead of the curve. I think there's probably no doubt that played a role in motivating this policy on Facebook's part. But as for the question of why it's so narrow, why it isn't a broader policy, the cynical explanation is that because they don't actually want to have to do anything. So they're tackling a non-existent problem, right? Yeah. They're tackling a problem of deepfakes that don't really happen. The Facebook explanation, which I think there's probably something to it, is, look, we already have policies for other types of misinformation. If you were to post that Pelosi video, and in fact, when people did post that Pelosi video, once fact checkers looked at it and examined it and debunked it and said, this is a doctored video, that came under Facebook's policies on misinformation. And under those policies, Facebook doesn't take down the post. They don't ban it. But what they do is they will add a little pop-up that said this has been flagged as false by our fact checkers. They'll link to the fact checkers. They'll link to related articles. If you try to share a post that's been flagged by Facebook's fact checkers, it'll tell you, and it'll give you a little warning before you share it. So that's a different mechanism. And that one sort of supersedes the deepfakes policy. Well, I should say the deepfake policy supersedes it when it meets that incredibly narrow definition that Facebook set up for deepfakes. But for most of the stuff that we're actually worried about, it's still covered under that same misinformation policy that Facebook already has. And then it's also worth noting that most of the actual deepfakes out there today are pornographic. They're deepfakes that are about putting. Usually women are the target. They put one woman's face on the body of a porn star or something like that. There's a real problem that really, does need to be addressed. But Facebook already has that one covered in a sense because it has rules against nudity and pornography that's already banned. So the vast majority of deepfakes that do exist are already covered under Facebook's policies today.